Hello, welcome to the fourth in my series Path to a Perfect 10, how to plan and prepare yourself for upgrading to Domino, Sametime and Traveler, Verse on Premise, etc. at the end of this year. My name's Gab Davis. I'm an admin and IBM Lifetime Champion for Social Business. I am a problem solver and an infrastructure designer, and I've been working with these products for 20 some years. So part of this webcast series is to step you through how to prepare for upgrading. We're currently on our first step, which is Are we ready? And this is the last section in this first step. So this one's Are we ready? Identifying system requirements. Now, obviously, right now, we don't have a product. There are no version 10 products in our hands. There is no documentation. We're not even at the beta stage. So identifying system requirements for something that we don't actually have any documentation on is it's not a thing I can give you a lot of detail on. What I want to talk about is how we approach identifying system requirements in general when we're doing an upgrade and what we know about version 10 and how that's going to impact our infrastructure already. So, what hardware resources do you have currently? What are the system requirements for the current versions? I'm hopeful you're on the very latest 901 fix packs for everything, but you might not be. So, to get us to version 10, let's talk about what we need to do to be in the best position for that and on the latest version. Also, while we're here, and whenever I'm doing any upgrade, this isn't version 10 specific, now is always a good opportunity to review and redesign your architecture. You don't have to, but look at the new features that are coming, look at the things you want to be able to do, and consider whether now is an appropriate time to start refreshing some of your design and maybe some of your hardware. So let's talk about reviewing system requirements. You don't want to discover when version 10, look, I wrote fix pack 10, typo. You don't want to discover when version 10 comes out that the old hardware and operating system you're using are no longer supported. You know, the product comes out, you're ready to install, and you discover that you're running an unsupported version of the operating system. We don't know that's going to be the case. It's likely only the oldest will be no longer supported. So if you're on Windows 2003 as your operating system, you already know that needs upgrading. So it's very likely, if anything is no longer supported, it's going to be the oldest versions of operating systems. Always, regardless of when you're upgrading, check the exact requirements and limitations before they plan. IBM release system requirements for every new fix pack and every new version, and they do change. So what I'm saying here is correct as of today, which is the 31st of May 2018. If you're looking at this at any day other than today, go look at the original URL links I'm giving you to see if the information has changed. So, is your operating system still supported by the developer? That's really important. Windows 2003, no longer supported by Microsoft. Windows 2008 support ends in January 2020. If we're talking about deploying version 10 towards the end of this year, nearly 2019, do you really want to be deploying it on an operating system that will only be supported for another year? Red Hat 6 and Red Hat 7.3 both end support this year. So also, how old is your hardware? Now might be a good time to plan a refresh. I mentioned this later on in my presentation. I've seen huge performance improvements at customer sites where I've done health checks just by replacing faster disk on old disk that's been there several years. And there's lots of things beyond buying huge new hardware to deploy that make a big difference if we take the opportunity to refresh them. So let's talk about Domino. There's lots of not terribly interesting stuff on here, but I wanted to share it with you. So Domino 901 Fix Pack 10, that is the TechNote link to the system requirements. Currently, the operating systems on Linux, Red Hat 6.3 and higher, 7 and higher, and SLES is 11, Service Pack 1 and 12. Windows currently supported 2008 R2, 2012, 2012 R2, and 2016. Now, Domino 2016 supported Fix Pack 8 and later. AIX 7.1 and 7.2, 64-bit, and IBM I 7.1, 7.2, and 7.3. Also, Domino supports installation on hypervisors. A much larger list is on the systems requirements page, along with some notes about specific architecture. But Hyper-V 2008 R2, Hyper-V 2012 and 2012 R2 on Windows, and Hyper-V 2016. And on VMware, ESXi 4, 5, and 5.5. You'll notice what I haven't mentioned here is Docker. Domino is supported for installation in a Docker environment as of Perfect10. I do not consider that a production environment. Right now, Domino and Docker for me is for lab and development environments, not production, so I haven't talked about it here. The Sametime community server, this is going to be interesting. HCL have announced in the version 10 timeframe they will only be updating the community server. That doesn't mean the other servers are being discontinued. They're staying as they are, but in the short time frame to version 10, only the community server, which is the core of all Sametime activity, is being updated. They've also announced that this update is going to move the platform from 32-bit to 64-bit, which is good. We wanted a 64-bit version of Sametime for a while, but it does mean if you have Sametime community server, that's the one product you are going to have to move, possibly operating system, to get it to 64-bit. So currently, the community server requires WebSphere to run the system console and DB2 to run the database for the system console. Without the system console, on the latest version of Sametime, you can't manage things like policies and other server settings because the interface for those is directly in the system console. Now, there are XML files, if you know where they are, you could hack about with, but you wouldn't get support for that. So right now, let's assume the system requirements for Sametime are going to remain the same, except for the community server, which is going to be Windows and Linux 64-bit only. Only those two platforms, 64-bit, in line with the Domino operating system support. And I have a link there to Sametime Communicate system requirements. Communicate includes audio and video and the meeting server. So, not the meeting, but when you look at Communicate, you're only looking for the requirements for the community server, not for all the servers. So then we have Traveler. So Traveler 9.0.1.3 and higher, that's the tech note to find system requirements for that. For Domino 901, it is supported to some extent on 8.5.3 with the upgrade pack. Don't do that. You're gonna lose out a lot of the newer features with Traveler that are not supported on 8.5.3. So it will work, but you need to be getting your Traveler server to 901. For high availability, you need a database server, either DB2 or SQL. And again, although Traveler supports DB2 9.7 Fixed Pack 5 and 10.1 and 11.1, you do get version 10.5 workgroup server as part of your entitlement to use for Traveler. So if you're on DB2 9.7, I would be seriously considering upgrading that. If you're on SQL Server 2008 versus 2012 R2 or 2016, I would consider upgrading it. There is a good document in the IBM Knowledge Server on capacity planning for Traveler. Now, in theory, if your Traveler environment isn't changing, the number of users aren't changing, then you should just be able to do an in-place upgrade to version 10 for this. There's nothing they've said so far about Traveler that would make me think that you wouldn't be able to do that. But I wanted to just cover the options here for those of you that have older environments that you know you need to upgrade, that maybe you want to step that upgrade, start moving up to a newer version before version 10 comes out. And notes. So there hasn't been much in terms of system requirements on version 10 of Notes. Currently, the Eclipse-based standard Notes client is supported on Windows, Mac, and Linux. We haven't had any changes about client-side support for version 10, so I wouldn't plan for that. The Notes client is currently supported for new operating systems like Windows 10 and El Capitan on Mac. but also older versions all the way back to Windows 7 and Yosemite. So if there was going to be a change, I'd expect to see maybe lack of support for the older versions. But while Microsoft and Apple will support those versions, I would expect IBM to carry on supporting them. I simply don't know, but it's not something I'm going to plan for, considering upgrading the clients at this point. Maybe we'll know more when the betas come out. So let's talk about operating systems. Um, People ask me what operating system will you choose, and my answer is always the same. You should choose the operating system that your company and your IT department are most comfortable supporting and maintaining. And that's because poorly maintained or unpatched server operating systems expose major security vulnerabilities. So if no one in your company is comfortable supporting, maintaining, patching Linux, don't use Linux. Use what you're going to be comfortable supporting and maintaining. Beyond that, the key things we care about is age of the operating system and likely long-term support by the developer. As I mentioned, Windows 2003 is no longer supported. You don't want to have an operating system that the developers themselves are no longer supporting. Performance, which means configuration and maintenance, which goes back to my point of if you're not comfortable with this operating system, don't deploy it. I've been to plenty of sites where people have deployed Linux and then just left it from the day they deployed it because no one wanted to touch it, and that's not a good solution. Um, don't expect IBM HCL to support aging operating systems indefinitely. You have to kind of make an assumption at some point these older operating systems will no longer be supported. Domino, Sametime, Traveler, one of their biggest strengths and biggest problems is they're really good at performing despite problems in their environments. You can have lousy hardware and poor performing disk and network that drips up and down. The servers will keep going, but they shouldn't be expected to. So one of the things I'm trying to talk about here is let's make sure our servers are in the best condition possible in preparation for version 10. So Domino, what does Domino care about? Domino cares about disk. It cares about disk, and more disk. It cares about performance. It's why we have problems with poorly configured SANs, for instance, because often SANs are considered for like file sharing, and that is not what Domino does. Transaction logs are designed to improve performance and recovery if you enable them on Domino server, but don't put them on a shared disk with the Domino data. It defeats the purpose. Transaction logs are much more read-write intensive than, say, Deos NLOs. So transaction logs don't need a lot of space unless you're doing archival, but they need to have a high-performance dedicated disk. NLOs don't need to be particularly high performance, and they can be on a separate disk than, say, your Domino data. Just make sure it's one that's reasonably accessible and not on a remote site. Also, Domino cares about the more processing threads you have available, the more instances of tasks you can run. So if you have the ability to create more threads, you can run more instances of things like the replicator or the updater. I'm not saying you should, it depends on your environment, but you can. I've seen, as I said earlier, huge improvements in server performance simply for introducing faster and newer disks. So if you can't afford to refresh your hardware, at least consider refreshing the disk and give the servers a chance to shine. Often people leave disks there until they fall over. And once disks are 3 years old, 4 years old, they're not performing well. They're not performing as fast as new disks. There are also new server features in version 10 already announced that you should consider. One is the removal of the 64 gig limit and a new 256 gig limit. So is that going to allow you to increase your data storage? Are you going to do less archiving? Do you need to make certain your operating system and disk can handle those size files efficiently? Publication of statistics for the new Relic service. You're either going to be publishing out or you're going to set up private locations for New Relic internally. Either way, the data is leaving your Domino server and going somewhere else and going to be queried from another location. So think about that. Node integration with Domino. This is a huge thing. Does Node become your alternate or even your default HTTP interface? If you've got a Domino server running HTTP with your applications on it, are you now going to have two interfaces, and do you need to now scale your Domino HTTP server for the Node queries? Again, we're not even in beta. We just know this is happening, so it should be something you should be thinking about. Are these features you're going to make use of, and can your current architecture support you doing that? So Traveler is an HTTP service, so it's less dependent on disk performance. It has very little data itself on the Traveler server than it is on network performance and memory. So for every configured user, the Traveler server will continually probe their mail server asking for updates. So network latency is really important. Also, every device connected to the Traveler server consumes multiple threads. So the number of threads is constrained by memory. So the Traveler server in standalone mode also creates a local database to store the state of mobile devices, and maintenance of that database and fragmentation of the database on the disk is related to Traveler performance. But the key thing I want to say here is there's no reason to expect Traveler 10 is going to require more resources than the version you're currently running. There's nothing we've heard about Traveler 10 that would make me think that you're going to have to change anything to get a benefit from that. Sametime Community Server can support 20,000 users. Put a mux in front of it, it can support 100,000 users. Unlike Traveler, we already know the system requirements will be changing to 64-bit, so there's no reason to expect any other requirements in the moment, but you should plan for that. The Sametime Community Server cares about memory and it cares about processor. And if you don't have a multiplexer, it cares about network, because without a multiplexer, every person connected to the community server is creating its own network connection directly to it. So at this point, where are we? And I know I raced through that and I've missed out a lot of things. I didn't want to go too deep, or this will be a 2-hour workshop instead of a 15-minute webcast. At this point, we should understand the hardware and operating systems we have assigned to Domino Sametime Traveler and whether the servers need refreshing. Regardless of version 10, how healthy are your servers now? You should also start to be thinking about whether to use the upgrade as an opportunity to refresh your architecture and be in a position to leverage the new features. There is nothing worse than going, we've got version 10 with everything and look at all these new features, and your users question the performance because you've put it on old, tired hardware and operating systems and disk that really you should have upgraded. So give the products a chance, give them their best chance to shine by making sure the environment you're installing them into is in a good state. And in future webcasts, we are going to talk about health check and performance and how to tell if we have any issues in our environment before we upgrade. The exception to all of this is Sametime version 10, which will be a community update only, and it's going to require you to move from your 32-bit to your new 64-bit, which means a new Domino install, because your Domino install that hosts Sametime is currently 32-bit. That doesn't mean to say you can't do it on the same box. It's very possible you're going to be able to. All of the key databases like VP User Info and ST Center, they're not going to change when you go to 64-bit. So it's very possible you will be able to uninstall and reinstall. But as I said, we don't have documentation yet, so we don't know. I want to make the point, currently there is no reason why you should need to upgrade hardware or operating system for Domino or anything else if it's still within support, i.e. not Windows 2013. This is me suggesting that you take the opportunity to plan for this and maybe refresh and clean up some of this stuff that you know has gotten old and needs updating. And as I keep saying, we're not even in beta yet, which is coming in June, July. So anything could be announced, but that's where we are now. So next up, we're going to be talking about identifying performance issues. This is what I mentioned earlier, where we're going to be looking at health checks and identifying, do we need to consider upgrading any part of our environment at a resource level, at a network level, a disk level. Then we need to talk about what to upgrade. So we move on from are you ready to what to upgrade and how to decide priorities. So speak to you next time. Thank you very much for joining.